our second advanced lateral exercise is haunches in. And like all the advanced lateral exercises, what makes them collecting or engagement exercises, where we load the hind legs and shift the center of gravity toward the hind legs and make the forehand lighter and freer, is that the horse is going sideways with bend. Now, haunches in, sometimes you'll see it written as travers, means the same thing. Haunches in and travers are the same. And haunches in is a wonderful suppling and, as I just said, engagement exercise. But sometimes riders are a little bit nervous, especially in the canter, about doing haunches in, because their horses all on their own tend to be a little bit crooked. They carry their haunches a little bit to the inside, especially in the canter. And so they're concerned, well, gee, why would I ever want to do haunches in the canter when my horse already wants to carry his haunches to the inside in the canter? Well, I have two things to say about that. One thing is that when you're doing haunches in, you have true bend through the horse's side from pole to tail. And remember our equation, bend plus sideways equals engagement. So you're actually engaging the hind leg. But if the horse is just drifting his hindquarters to the inside, he's doing it with no bend through his body, and he's doing it to open the joints of the hind legs and avoid the engagement. Plus, the haunches in is done on the aids, on your command. It's not done because the horse has decided to do something on his own. So those are the two primary differences, that there is bend and the horse is doing it on the aids. Now, getting back to the aids, just like the shoulder in, the haunches in order to have correct bend, we have the bend as if the horse is on the arc of a 10-meter circle, which means if I'm going, let's say I'm going to the right, I would ask for a little right flexion at the pole with a little turn of my right wrist, but I need to support with my other rein so that I don't get neck bend. I want a uniform bend from pole to tail. So my inner rein asks for that +1 flexion with the face 1 inch to the inside of the neutral position, but my outside hand keeps the neck straight. My weight is on my inside if I'm circling to the right, in this case my right seat bone, to help with the engagement of the inside hind leg. And my inner leg is on the girth as a pole for the horse to bend around, and my outside leg is a couple inches behind the girth, so I make sure I don't just have bend in the front, but I bend the back end around my inner leg. Now those are your bending aids. In order to do the haunches in, you're basically doing the last step of a 10-meter circle, continued on a straight line. So as long as your horse can bend on a 10-meter circle, you keep your bending aids on and you ask for your angle with your outside aids. And that's generally the rule for all this advanced lateral work. Your inner aids ask for bend and your outer aids ask for angle. So if I were circling to the right and I were bending Moshi to the right, I wouldn't quite finish that 10-meter circle. Toward the end of the 10-meter circle, I'd close my outer hand in a fist and maybe take it as a little bit of an opening rein to lead his shoulders to the track. And my outer leg, which is behind the girth, at the same time would give a tiny little squeeze to tell his haunches not to finish the circle. Now, the only thing that I think is a little bit more challenging with haunches in than with shoulder in is that in shoulder in we know that we want to take the shoulders 30 degrees off the rail, which puts the horse on 3 tracks. Well, we also want to have in haunches in the hind legs 30 degrees displaced to the inside, and that also puts the horse on 3 tracks. In other words, if I were tracking to the right, his left front leg, if I were coming towards you, would make its own track. His right foreleg and left hind would be lined up, the hind leg behind the front leg, that would make a separate track, and the inside hind leg, the right hind leg, makes its own track, 3 tracks. But the thing about haunches in, because you can't see what's behind you, is that riders have a tendency to do what I call pass-go. In other words, they push the hindquarters too much sideways. And if you push the haunches too much sideways, you have to remember, just as in the shoulder in, that at an angle much greater than 30 degrees, the horse physically can't bend through his side. So you put him in a position where he has to do a leg yield and haunches in position rather than a haunches in with true bend. Now, one of the things that you can that you can use as a visual reference point for your haunches in is that, remember, in shoulder in, I said if you looked at half of the horse, that would tell you if the horse was truly bending or not. And so in shoulder in, we looked at the back end of the horse, and we wanted to see if the back end of the horse, if that's all we could see, did the haunches stay absolutely parallel to the rail when we brought the shoulders in, or did the haunches slide out? Well, the same rule applies for haunches in. In the haunches in, if all you could see was from this much forward, and something was blocking your vision, another horse was going by, or there was a car in the ring, or whatever, you would not have enough information by looking just at the front end of the horse to know whether the horse was just going straight down the long side or was he in haunches in, because when he's bending through his side, the position of the front end is identical. So to sharpen your eye up and to make sure when you watch other horses that you know they're really doing haunches in with a bend and not just a leg yield in haunches in position, which, like I said in the lesson in shoulder in, that's fine if you want to do a leg yield. But if your goal is to engage the horse and collect the horse, our sixth ingredient in the training scale, he has to go sideways with a bend. So let me show you that here. So if I were just going straight down the track, my horse's body would be basically parallel to the track, and even on a straight line, the horse should have a little bit of flexion at the pole to the inside. That's the correct position of a schooled horse. When I ask, by closing my outer hand in a fist and giving a tiny little push with my outer leg, when I ask the haunches to come in, the forehand should not change position. So as I come toward the camera now, that's what I want you to focus on as your indicator that I have managed to keep the bend and he's not just doing a leg yield. So first I go straight with a little bit of flexion at the pole to the right. Now watch his front shoulders and his front feet. When I ask his haunches to come in, his forehand should be in exactly the same spot. Now a good test is when you go straight ahead again, do his front legs have to shift position to get back on that straight line? And I'm going to demonstrate that in a second so that you can see that. Because this is what often happens when riders either don't keep the bend or they push the hindquarters past go, and then the horse can't bend anymore. Okay, so the hindquarters are too far to the inside, and his front legs and shoulders are pointed out to the left, so that when I straighten him again, he has to swivel his shoulders around to the right in order to get them back on the straight line. So I'm going to do this right, and then I'm going to do it wrong. Forehand parallel, and now wrong, because I pushed the haunches in too much. That's just leg yield and haunches in position. So your criterion for are you keeping the bend in the haunches in is where the front end is placed. Now, I'm going to go on to a different haunches in exercise in a second, but before I do that, I want to tell you that we have an exercise that's the mirror image of haunches in, or remember we also called haunches in travers. The mirror image is an exercise called renvers, and all of the same rules apply, the bend and the angle, whatever. And it's a suppling exercise and it's an engagement exercise. And I'm going to show you renvers in a second, but I want to show you one of my favorite exercises because it tells me two things. It tells me, is my horse supple enough to change his bend? And it also tells me if my horse is absolutely between my legs and my hand, because as I do this exercise, which I'm going to do on the second track, remember that's 1 meter off the rail, when I change from the exercise, which is shoulder in, to renvers, which remember is just the mirror image of travers, it's also called haunches out instead of haunches in, I want to see that his hindquarters stay exactly on the original track. And that's why I do it 1 meter off the rail, partly because he needs room for the renvers, but also I'll be able to tell very easily if I've drifted a little bit more toward the track or if I've drifted away from the track. And this is one of the exercises I do with Moshe almost every day as part of his warm-up. And I'm going to do it the way I do it in warm-up with Moshe very deep, because I use it, like I said, in the warm-up exercise. So I do shoulder in, and then I keep his haunches in the same place, but I change the bend. And a little bit, he stepped a hair to the right, and then I go back to shoulder in and straight. So my goal with this exercise, as I go from basically shoulder in to haunches out, is that the hindquarters can stay straight on the line of travel. And then I know not only do I have a very supple horse who can smoothly go from shoulder in to renvers, which is really right haunches in, by changing his bend because he's very supple, but he's absolutely between my legs and my hands because his hindquarters stay on the original line regardless of whether I'm doing the shoulder in or whether I'm doing the renvers. Now here's another use for haunches in. We can use haunches in. Remember, it's an engagement exercise, so we can use it to develop self-carriage in the horse. In other words, that loading of the hind legs, that 6th ingredient in the training scale, collection. So I'm going to show you a little exercise that you can do if your horse tends to be too much on the forehand, let's say in the canter. But Moshe, as you see, has been just standing around quite a bit and not doing very much. So I need to take a little break to warm him up a little bit, and then I'll show you that exercise. So I'll be back in a second. As I said, we can use the haunches in to increase self-carriage or increase engagement in some of the other gaits. One of the things for you to think about is that the walk and the canter are very closely related. So if you have a horse that tends to go too much on the forehand or too strung out or too fast in his canter because he's not in good balance in the canter, you can use your haunches in actually in the walk to help you with your canter, because those two gaits are very closely related. So I'm just going to canter right now just for a second with Moshe kind of long and strung out so that you can take a little mental Polaroid of that and then see the difference in what the haunches in position creates in terms of his balance and his self-carriage and slowing that canter down so I don't feel like he's running off. So here's a bad canter. So almost 4 beat. I can feel bum 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 bum. I don't feel a clear 3 beat. Strung out. Okay. So let's say your horse canters like that. You can use haunches in the walk to help. So what I'm going to do is just go a little bit in haunches in, down the long side. I'm going to straighten him before the corner. But I could even do, and I'll show you that in a second, not only do the haunches in on the long side, but I could also continue that haunches in onto a circle. Then after a while, when I feel him package himself up because he's bending as he's going sideways, I'm going to just pick up the canter just for a couple of strides and let him feel his potential as far as his new balance in the canter, and I come back to the walk very, very quickly before the canter degenerates, and I go back in to the haunches in position. So now I'm going to do haunches in on the little circle, and continue down the long side, in haunches in. Good. Then I'm going to straighten them and ask for the canter. And you take a look at the difference in this balance. And then I walk and immediately step into haunches in before he gets too long and too strung out, as I feel the center of gravity shifting back and Moshi packaging himself, taking more weight on the hind legs, the croup going down, the withers going up. I straighten him and ask for the canter. And once again, compare this canter to what you saw before. And ho, and haunches in right away. Couple steps, shift him back, and canter, good. He lowered his hindquarters into that canter to part. Good boy, Moshi. Okay, so I'm going to let Moshi have a little break, and I want to show you one last thing. So, you know, the focus of this session was really on just learning haunches in. But I just want to take this one step further to show you how all of these exercises, your 10-meter circle, your shoulder in, your haunches in, later on you'll see the half pass, are related. Remember, all the advanced lateral exercises, bend plus sideways equals engagement. So when we go down the long side with bend, and we know we're in bend because the forehand stays on the original track of the circle, and we're on two tracks, the horse bends the joints of the hind legs. Later on, as you get more advanced, this is just a little bonus for you, you would do the same thing to start to develop canter pirouettes. But just like our turns on the haunches, which will later become our walk pirouettes, the key is the horse bending. And we use the same criterion for this exercise and the turn on the haunches as we do for the haunches in down the long side. And that is to know that the horse is truly bending through his side because his forehand stays on the original track of the circle, whether you're just cantering around a circle or whether you're asking the haunches to come to the inside. So alternating between cantering straight on a small circle and haunches in the canter on a small circle, and seeing that his shoulders and his front feet and his head and neck stay in the exact same position tells you if he's doing haunches in with a bend on a small circle. And that haunches in with a bend on a small circle is called a working canter pirouette, which eventually becomes a finished product pirouette. So I want you to watch two things with Moshi. I want you to watch as I do the exercise from cantering straight on a small circle to a little bit of haunches in to straight on a small circle to a little bit of haunches in, where his forehand stays. Does it stay on the original track of the circle regardless of which exercise I'm doing? Then switch your focus and look at the back end and see if when I'm doing the haunches in, he bends the joints of his hind legs and lowers his hindquarters a little bit. Because after all, that's the point of all these exercises. We don't do these exercises just because we're sick and tired of going straight forward and we want to do something a little fancier. So, let's see. First we go straight on a little circle, then haunches in, and then straight, and watch the forehand. Haunches in, and straight, haunches in, and straight, stay in the same place. Now I'm going to do the same thing. You watch the hindquarters. There. Good. 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 And haunches in. Watch the hindquarters. Good. Good boy. There. So that's eventually some of the things that you can do with your haunches in. All those exercises are so closely related that you start with your 10-meter circle. Your last step of the 10-meter circle is your haunches in. Your haunches in on a small circle eventually becomes your pirouette.